The cold of the ancient marble floor seeped through her thin robes, a familiar penance. But this was new. The man chained to the central dais, a ruin of muscle and scarred skin, was unlike any petitioner or prisoner the temple had ever received. He was broken, his breath a ragged grate, the scent of his blood and his rage a metallic tang in the sanctified air. He was an alpha, or he had been. Now he was just a offering to their unforgiving goddess, a trophy delivered by the pack that had shattered him. Her task was simple: to bring him water, to clean his wounds, to observe. To do it all as she had done everything for the last decade, in absolute, binding silence. She knelt, her veil masking her features, her hands steady as she offered the simple wooden bowl. He didn't move. His head was bowed, black hair matted with grime and blood. She nudged the bowl closer to his cracked lips. Nothing. He was already lost. A pang of useless pity resonated in her chest, a feeling she had learned to smother. She was Ilara, the silent priestess, the temple's living symbol of atonement. She felt nothing. She was nothing but a vessel of obedience. He shifted, the heavy chains rattling, the sound echoing in the vast, empty hall of judgment. He wasn't lost. He was waiting. Slowly, agonizingly, he lifted his head. His eyes, even swollen, burned with a feral gold. They locked onto her, through the veil, through the shadows, and held her captive. A low, broken sound rumbled in his chest, and then he spoke, his voice a gravel and ash whisper that slid directly into her soul. Ilara, wait, before the next revelation unfolds. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. The name, her name, struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was not the name she was known by. It was not Acolyte, or Silent One, or Sister. It was the name that had been buried with her childhood, the name that had been sealed away by the High Priestess magic the day her voice was taken. The binding oath, etched onto her soul and scarred onto her skin, flared with agonizing, icy fire. It felt like a hook lodged in her throat, yanking her back to a self she was forbidden to be. Her hands, so steady a moment before, trembled violently. The wooden bowl slipped from her grasp, shattering on the marble. The water spread like a dark, accusing stain. She gasped, but no sound came out. Only a sharp, painful intake of air. The Alpha, the fallen Alpha, watched her, his gaze sharp and terrifyingly lucid, before his eyes rolled back and he slumped against his chains, unconscious. Footsteps, sharp and furious, echoed from the corridor. "Incompetence! You have defiled the Hall of Judgment, Acolyte!" High Priestess Morwenna swept into the chamber, her gray robes immaculate, her face a mask of cold fury. She was a tall woman, severe and unyielding, who ruled the Sisters of the Moon with a grip of iron. She saw the shattered bowl, the spilled water, and the trembling priestess. Her thin hand snapped out, striking Ilara across the face. The blow was hard enough to send Ilara reeling, her veil knocked askew. She bit back the silent cry of pain, pressing her hand to her cheek, her eyes fixed on the floor in submission. You were tasked with a simple duty, to tend to the forsaken, not to waste the temple's resources with your clumsiness. Morwenna's voice was like chipping ice. This is Kalen, once Alpha of the Shadowfen. He is a monster who lost his pack to his own weakness and arrogance. He is here not for sanctuary, but for cleansing. He is a stain to be purged. Kalen didn't stir. He looked less like a monster and more like a sacrifice. Your penance for this failure is to be his soul tender, Morwenna declared, her eyes glittering with malice. You will take him to the isolation cells. You will clean his wounds. You will bear witness to his disgrace, and you will do it without further error. She gestured to the 2 temple guards who had followed her in. Take him, and take her. She will learn that even the silent must pay for their mistakes. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a punishment, not a duty. To be confined with him, this man who knew the impossible. This man who had spoken the name that was her deepest, most dangerous secret. The guards hauled Kalen to his feet. He was a dead weight, his body a map of brutality. As they dragged him past, his head lolled, and for a second, his open eyes seemed to find hers again. A new, terrifying thought pierced her fear. He had not just spoken her name. He had spoken it as if he had been searching for it. The isolation cells were deep beneath the temple, carved from the mountain's root. They were cold, damp, and smelled of stone dust and despair. Alara's cell was a small alcove opposite the barred enclosure where Kalen had been thrown onto a thin straw pallet. The guards had left her a bucket of water, cloths, a jar of healing salve, and a single loaf of stale bread. Then, the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor had boomed shut, leaving them in the suffocating quiet, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. He was still unconscious, or perhaps just withdrawn into the depths of his pain. Alara approached the bars, her movements hesitant. The binding on her throat had settled into a dull, persistent ache. Alara! How? How could he know it? For 10 years, not a soul had uttered it. She was Acolyte 14. Her identity had been methodically erased, scrubbed away by ritual, silence, and Morwenna's cruel discipline. She'd been brought to the temple at 8 years old, a terrified orphan whose accidental, uncontrolled burst of wild magic had nearly blinded a village elder. High Priestess Morwenna had declared her a vessel of chaos and had performed the binding ritual herself. A silver collar, not of metal, but of magic, locked around her throat. You will never speak again, Morwenna had commanded, her voice sealing the spell. Your silence will be your atonement. Through it, you will learn control. Through it, the goddess will forgive your nature. The scar was still there, a thin, pale line hidden by the high collar of her robes just below her jaw. It itched. It always itched when she was afraid. Kalen groaned, a low, animal sound of pure agony. It snapped Alara from her memories. He was burning with fever. His skin was slick with sweat, and the wounds on his chest and back, deep gashes that spoke of claws and silver, were inflamed. If she didn't tend to them, the infection would claim him before the cleansing ritual ever could. Her vow of silence was a penance, but her training as a healer was a duty. She unlatched the heavy, unoiled gate, the shriek of the metal making her wince. She slipped inside the cell, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. He was larger up close, even diminished. The sheer power that must have inhabited this frame was staggering. Now it was banked to a guttering ember. She dipped a cloth in the cold water and hesitated. To touch him felt like a transgression. He was an alpha, even a fallen one. She was nothing, a shadow. Alara. He knew her. That made him dangerous. But the fever was more dangerous still. She pushed aside the torn remnants of his shirt and began to clean the deepest gash across his ribs. His skin was fire. He flinched at her touch, a growl vibrating in his chest, but he was too weak to stop her. "Go away," he mumbled, his voice thick. Let me die." Ilara ignored him, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a decade of silent servitude. She cleaned the grit from his wounds, her touch as gentle as she could make it. His breathing was shallow. His scent, normally a wild, grounding mix of pine and storm, was soured by sickness and defeat. "Go away," he mumbled, his voice thick. "Let me die." Ilara ignored him, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a decade of silent servitude. She cleaned the grit from his wounds, her touch as gentle as she could make it. His breathing was shallow. His scent, normally a wild, grounding mix of pine and storm, was soured by sickness. When his wounds were clean, she opened the jar of salve. It was a simple temple remedy of feverfew and willow bark, but she paused before applying it. She held her palm just above his skin, feeling the heat radiating from him. Then, closing her eyes, she did something she was forbidden to do. She reached inside herself, past the crushing weight of the silent vow, to the small, deep well of her own power. It was not the chaotic burst of her childhood. It was something else. A quiet, silver light, cool and steady. She had discovered it by accident years ago, tending to a wounded bird. Her silence, meant to be a prison, had inadvertently focused her magic into something else, something healing. She willed the cool silver energy from her palm into his burning skin. It was a tiny, tentative thread of magic. She felt it touch his, and his wolf, a great, wounded beast pacing on the edge of his consciousness, lifted its head. Kalen gasped, his body jolting as if struck by lightning. His eyes flew open, the gold no longer fever-bright, but sharp, focused, and utterly shocked. He stared at her hand, hovering over his chest, and then at her veiled face. What are you doing?" he rasped. Ilara snatched her hand back, the silver light vanishing. She had been caught. She scrambled backward, her heart leaping into her throat. She had broken the deepest rule. Not the vow of silence, but the vow of powerlessness. Morwenna would have her flogged, or worse. Kalen pushed himself up onto one elbow, his muscles straining. The movement cost him, and a grimace of pain twisted his features. But his eyes never left her. I felt that. That was not the salve." He looked at her, his gaze piercing. "Who are you?" Ilara pressed her lips together, her entire body rigid with fear. She shook her head, her hands finding each other in her lap, fingers twisting. He watched her, his breathing harsh. "You won't speak. Of course." He let his head fall back against the damp stone wall, but he didn't close his eyes. "You dropped the bowl when I said your name." She flinched. "So it is your name. Ilara." He said it again, tasting the sound. "How do I know that name?" he mused, more to himself than to her. "I've been in darkness for weeks, since Garrus took my pack, since he..." He choked on the words, a raw agony rippling across his face. He slammed a fist against the stone floor, a crack of bone on rock. "They said they were taking me to the High Alpha's council. Liars! They brought me here, to this mausoleum, to be judged by a coven of shadows." He turned his burning gaze back to her. "And you're one of them, a silent, veiled shadow." Ilara's fear warred with a sudden, sharp indignation. She was not his enemy. She was a prisoner here, just as he was. She picked up the salve and the cloth, her message clear. "I am only here to heal you." She moved forward again, cautiously. He watched her, his whole body tense, a predator coiled. But he let her approach. He let her finish cleaning the wound and apply the salve, which now felt useless compared to the magic she had briefly channeled. "Why?" he whispered as she worked. "Why do you help me? Morwenna. I heard her. She hates me. She probably hates you, too." Alara finished her work. She rose, gathering the soiled cloths. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a response, even if she could. "You're afraid of her," he stated. It wasn't a question. "She holds your chain. Just as my pack, just as Garrus holds mine." He looked away, disgust and self-loathing twisting his features. "Get out!" Alara didn't need to be told twice. She fled the cell, locking the gate behind her. She retreated to her own cold alcove, sinking onto the thin mat, her entire body shaking. He was right. She was terrified. Morwenna had bound her voice, her life, her future. But this man, this Kalen, was a different kind of threat. He saw too much. And he had spoken the name that could unravel her entirely. For 3 days, a tense, silent routine formed. Ilara would bring him his meager meals, broth and bread, and tend to his wounds. He was healing, his formidable shifter constitution fighting off the infection, but his spirit remained in the dark. He barely spoke. He just watched her. His golden eyes tracked her every movement, filled with a brooding intensity that unnerved her more than his anger. He saw the way she moved, the economy of her gestures, the innate subservience that had been drilled into her. And he saw the moments she forgot it. Once, a small mouse darted from a crack in the wall. Ilara startled, then softened. She broke off a tiny piece of her own bread and set it on the floor. She watched the mouse retrieve it, a small secret smile touching her lips before she remembered herself, and her expression smoothed back into neutrality. Kalen began, then stopped. He seemed to realize the futility of asking questions. Instead, he just observed. He was an alpha. Reading people, reading intent, weakness, and strength was his nature. "You're not like them," he said finally, his voice stronger now, rough but clear. Ilara was changing the dressing on his shoulder. She paused, her hands still. You have kindness in you," he said, as if the concept was foreign. "They are cold, like her, Morwenna. They're all echoes of her." He shifted, wincing. "She came to see me last night, when you were gone." Ilara's head snapped up. She hadn't known. Morwenna's visits were never good. She searched him for new injuries, her hands running over his arms, checking his ribs. He let her, his skin warming at her touch, a different kind of warmth than the fever. "She didn't hurt me," he said, his voice dropping. "She talked. She told me what the cleansing is, a ritual, to sever the wolf, permanently, to make me mundane, an empty shell." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, a fate worse than death. Ilara's blood ran cold. She had heard whispers of the cleansing, but had never known what it truly entailed. It was a spiritual execution, a mutilation of the soul. She looked at this man, this proud, broken alpha, and saw the raw terror beneath his rage. He was trapped. She said. "It was the goddess will," Kalen continued, his voice thick with contempt. "That I am an abomination, that my pride caused the death of my mate, that I deserve to be nothing." The death of his mate. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ilara's hands, still resting on his arm, felt the tremor that went through him. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated grief. She understood, now, the depths of his despair. He had lost everything. His pack, his mate, and now his wolf. Without thinking, without meaning to, she tightened her grip on his arm. It was a small gesture, a touch, a wordless, I see you." He looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her veiled face. His expression was unreadable. "Why are you here, Ilara?" he asked, his voice soft, dangerous. "Not in this cell, in this temple. A woman who can heal with her hands, who bears a name she's forbidden to hear. You're a prisoner, aren't you?" Ilara went rigid. She pulled her hand away, standing up abruptly. She gathered her things, her movements jerky. "You see too much. You say too much. You are," he pressed, sitting up straighter. "She bound you, didn't she?" Ilara froze at the cell door, her back to him. "I see the scar," he whispered. "When you turned, just under your jaw. It flares, like magic, a binding." She was trembling. He was peeling back her layers, one by one, with nothing but his perception. "She muted you," he breathed, a horrifying realization dawning on his face. "That cold-hearted, she caged you." Ilara fled, slamming the gate, her heart hammering. She fled to her alcove and huddled, pulling her knees to her chest. He knew. He knew. He saw her prison, a prison she had lived in for so long she had almost forgotten it was there. She had accepted her silence as penance, a just punishment for her chaotic, dangerous nature. But Kalen had called it a cage. That night she couldn't sleep. His words echoed in the dark. Cage, bound, prisoner. He was wrong, wasn't he? Morwenna had saved her. She had given her a life, a purpose, atonement. She had protected the world from her. But the doubt, once planted, began to sprout. Why did her name, a simple, forgotten name, cause the binding to burn? Why did Morwenna inflict this punishment tending to Kalen, which held such a specific, personal terror for Ilara? She needed answers. Not Kalen's guesses, but real answers. The temple archives were forbidden to all but the High Priestess and her chosen scribes. But Ilara, in her decade of silent servitude, had been everywhere. She had cleaned every floor, dusted every shelf. She knew the secret ways. She knew the loose stone behind the altar of the lesser hall. She waited until the deepest part of the night, when the temple was hushed and the guards were drowsy. She slipped from her cell, a shadow among shadows. The corridors were cold, lit only by slivers of moonlight. She moved with a practiced grace, her bare feet making no sound. She reached the lesser hall, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She checked the corridor. Empty. She slipped behind the altar, her fingers finding the familiar crack. The stone pivoted inward, revealing a narrow, descending passage. The air that rose from it was stale, smelling of dust and dried-out parchment. This was Morwenna's private archive, the place where the temple's true history, its prophecies, and its secrets were kept. Ilara lit a taper with a flint and steel she'd secreted away, the small flame a defiant spark in the oppressive dark. The archive was a small, circular room, its walls lined with scrolls and ancient, leather-bound books. Morwenna's presence was heavy here. Her cold, controlling magic saturated the air. Ilara had no idea what she was looking for. A record of her arrival? A log of bindings? Her hands skimmed the shelves, her eyes scanning the cryptic labels. Histories, rituals, bindings. She pulled out the book on bindings. Her fingers, slick with nervous sweat, fumbled with the clasp. She opened it. It was all ritualistic script. Spells for warding, for sealing, for silencing. Her breath hitched. She found the chapter, on the silencing of the chaotic vessel. She read the script, her blood turning to ice. The ritual was complex, a binding of voice to magic. It was meant to suppress a power deemed uncontrollable and profane. But a note in the margin, penned in Morwenna's sharp, precise hand, detailed a modification. "The collar of silence," it read, "can be tied to a name. Speaking the anchor name will cause the binding to reject, inflicting catastrophic pain. A useful tool for control. A tool for control. Not for atonement, not for protection, for control." Ilara felt sick. Her entire life, her penance, her shame. It was a lie. A carefully constructed cage, just as Kylen had said. Her name was the key to her prison, and Morwenna had ensured it would be a source of agony, not release. She was putting the book back, when another scroll, tucked away in a dark corner, caught her eye. It was sealed not with the temple's crest, but with a silver wolf. A prophecy. Her hands trembled as she unrolled the delicate parchment. The script was ancient, the ink faded. "When the moon bleeds and the Shadowfen pack is broken, the forsaken wolf shall be brought to the stone. There he will find the silent hand, she who is caged by a false shepherd. His voice will be the key to her name, and her name shall be the key to her voice. Together they will reclaim the goddess's light, and the voice of the oracle shall be unbound. The silent hand, a false shepherd, the voice of the oracle." Ilara stared at the words, her mind struggling to comprehend. His voice will be the key to her name. He hadn't just known her name, he was meant to know it. This wasn't an accident, it was prophecy. She was not just Ilara, the chaotic orphan. She was the silent hand. And Morwenna, who had preached obedience to the goddess, Morwenna was the false shepherd. A wave of dizziness washed over her. This was too much. The lies, the prophecy, the weight of a destiny she had never known she possessed. She heard a sound from the passage above, a stone scraping. Morwenna. Ilara's blood froze. She quickly extinguished her taper, plunging the room into absolute darkness. She held her breath, pressing herself into the shadows of the bookshelf. Footsteps descended the stairs. A cold, magical light illuminated the archive. Morwenna stood in the doorway, her face a mask of suspicion. "I know someone is here," she hissed, her voice gliding over the stones. "The wards are disturbed." Ilara didn't breathe. Her heart felt like it would hammer its way out of her chest. Morwenna's eyes scanned the room. She was searching. Her gaze passed over the shelf Ilara hid behind. "Don't see me, don't see me." Morwenna took a step into the room, then paused. Her head tilted as if listening. "Acolyte Lyra," she called out, her voice sharp. "What is the meaning of this disturbance? I felt you." From the passage above, a small, trembling voice answered. "High Priestess, I thought I heard a noise. I came to investigate. I am sorry. I did not mean to disturb your wards." Lyra, the young, kind novice who sometimes slipped Ilara an extra piece of fruit. She was lying. She must have seen Ilara enter and was covering for her. Morwenna's eyes narrowed. "You are foolish, child. You know this place is forbidden." "Forgive me, High Priestess," Lyra whispered, sounding terrified. "It won't happen again." "It will not," Morwenna stated coldly. "Get back to your dormitory. Your penance will be decided in the morning." "Yes, High Priestess." The light footsteps retreated. Morwenna lingered for a moment longer, her suspicion still palpable in the air. She scanned the room one last time, her gaze cold and assessing. Then, with a swirl of her gray robes, she turned and ascended the stairs, the magical light vanishing with her. Ilara waited in the suffocating darkness for what felt like an eternity before she dared to move. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Lyra had saved her. The kind, timid girl had risked Morwenna's wrath for her. The thought strengthened her resolve. She couldn't let Lyra's sacrifice be in vain. She carefully rolled the prophecy and tucked it into the sleeve of her robe. She had to get back to the cell. She had to warn Kaelin. Morwenna was a liar, a manipulator, and the cleansing ritual, it wasn't justice. It was murder. It was Morwenna eliminating a threat. Perhaps Kaelin was a threat to her, just as Ilara was. When she returned to the dungeons, Kaelin was awake. He was pacing the small cell, a restless, caged predator. The moment she slipped through the outer door, his head snapped up. He saw the terror on her face, the way she clutched her sleeve. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. "Where did you go? You're shaking." Ilara fumbled with the lock on his cell, her hands trembling so much she could barely work the mechanism. She entered, and, instead of tending to him, she unrolled the prophecy, spreading it on the thin straw pallet. The moonlight from the high, narrow window was just enough to illuminate the ancient script. Kaelin knelt, his eyes scanning the words. She saw the exact moment he read it. His body went utterly still. "The Forsaken Wolf?" he read aloud, his voice rough with disbelief. "The Silent Hand." He looked from the parchment to her. This is about us." Ilara nodded, her whole body vibrating with a mixture of fear and a strange, terrifying new power. The voice of the Oracle. "Morwenna," she mouthed, her throat aching with the effort, the binding fighting her. She pointed to the words, "false shepherd." Kaelin's jaw tightened. She's not serving the goddess. She's serving herself. He looked at the prophecy again. His voice will be the key to her name, and her name shall be the key to her voice. He looked at her, his golden eyes intense. She didn't just silence you, Ilara. She locked away an oracle. The truth of it settled over them, heavy and absolute. Her silence wasn't a penance, it was a suppression. Morwenna had caged not just a girl, but a holy voice. "The cleansing," Kaelin said, his voice flat. "It's tonight, isn't it? Under the full moon?" Ilara's eyes widened. She hadn't known. But it made sense. The full moon was the height of the goddess's power, the only time such a ritual of severing could be performed. "She's not just severing my wolf," Kaelin realized, a cold fury entering his voice. "She's going to take it. She's siphoning power. That's why the temple feels so dead. She's bleeding it dry, and she's going to use my alpha spark to do it." He stood up, energized by rage. "We have to stop her." Ilara looked at him, her heart sinking. Stop her? How? He was a prisoner, his power diminished. She was silent, a slave to a magical binding. He saw the despair in her eyes. He gripped her shoulders, his touch firm, grounding. "No," he said fiercely, "look at me. You are not what she made you. You are the silent hand. You are an oracle. She is afraid of you." He touched the scar on her throat, his thumb tracing the line. His touch was warm, sending a jolt through her. This is the key. Her name shall be the key to her voice. She bound it with your name. She made your name the source of your pain. But the prophecy says it's a key. Ilara stared at him. What did it mean? "She's controlled you with fear," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. "The fear of that pain, the fear of breaking your vow. But what if? the only way. To break it? Ilara's breath hitched. To speak? To intentionally invoke the catastrophic pain Morwenna had designed? It was madness. The binding would kill her. It's a risk, he said, as if reading her mind. A terrible one. But what choice do we have? I will be an empty shell by dawn. And you will be her silent, caged oracle forever. He was right. The fear was suffocating, a cold hand around her heart. But the thought of remaining in this lie, of letting Morwenna win, of letting Lyra's bravery be for nothing, that was worse. She had a voice, a holy voice, and Morwenna had stolen it. A new feeling, hot and sharp, burned through her fear. Rage. She met Kaelin's gaze and, for the first time in her life, she didn't look away. She gave a single, determined nod. This ended tonight. The moon was high when the guards came. 2 temple sentinels, their faces impassive. They unlocked Kaelin's cell. It is time, Forsaken. The High Priestess awaits you at the altar of severance. Kaelin rose to his feet. He was weak, but his spine was straight. He was an alpha to his core. As they chained his wrists, his eyes found Ilara's. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Be ready. They dragged him out. Ilara waited, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She had one chance. The altar of severance was in the catacombs, a place of dark energy, built over a convergence of ley lines. Morwenna would be there, her focus absolute. Ilara slipped from her cell, the prophecy tucked safely in her robe. She moved through the temple, a ghost driven by a desperate purpose. She found Lyra in the kitchens, scrubbing pots, her eyes red from weeping. The girl looked up, her face pale with terror. "Acolyte," she gasped, "you shouldn't be here. Morwenna," Ilara placed a hand on Lyra's arm, silencing her. She looked into the girl's frightened eyes and tried to convey all the gratitude, all the urgency she felt. Then she did something she had never done. She gave an order. She pointed to the main bell, the one used to summon the acolytes to prayer. Then she pointed to herself, and then down to the catacombs. "When I am down there, ring the bell. Ring it like the temple is on fire." Lyra's eyes widened in understanding. It was a distraction, a massive one. It would throw the entire temple into chaos. It was an act of pure rebellion. Lyra's fear was visible, but then she saw the look in Ilara's eyes, the hard, unyielding resolve. Lyra nodded, her small chin firming. "I will," she whispered. Ilara squeezed her arm, then vanished back into the shadows. The catacombs were lit by flickering torches, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was frigid. In the center of the largest cavern was the altar, a massive slab of black obsidian. Kaelin was chained to it, spread-eagled and bare-chested. Morwenna stood over him, her arms raised. 4 of her most loyal acolytes stood at the points of a circle, chanting, their voices weaving a net of dark, siphoning magic. The air crackled with stolen power. "Kaelin, the Forsaken," Morwenna's voice boomed, echoing off the stone. "You are judged by the goddess and found wanting. Your pride has cost your pack. Your rage has cost your mate. Now your very spirit is forfeit. By the will of the moon, I cleanse you." She held a ritual knife, its edge glowing with a sickly green light. She was not just severing his wolf, she was preparing to absorb it. "No," a voice croaked. The sound was tiny, raw, like a hinge rusted shut. Everyone froze. Morwenna spun around. Ilara spun around. Ilara stood at the entrance to the cavern, her veil still in place, her body shaking from head to toe. The pain was instantaneous. The binding on her throat erupted in agony, a collar of pure, icy fire. It felt like hooks were tearing her from the inside out. She staggered, clutching her throat, a silent scream locked behind the pain. "You!" Morwenna shrieked, her composure cracking.
"Foolish, idiotic girl! You dare to break your vow!" Kalen raised his head, his eyes wide with terror and awe. "Alara, no!" "I told you what would happen," Morwenna sneered, advancing on her. "I told you the price of your voice." Alara fell to her knees, the pain blinding. It was too much. She couldn't. It was going to kill her. "She's controlled you with fear," Kalen's voice. "You are an oracle." She looked at Kalen, chained and helpless. She looked at Morwenna, her face twisted in a triumphant, cruel smile. The rage returned, hotter than the pain. She would not be a cage. She took a breath, a ragged, searing intake of air. She looked directly at the High Priestess. "You are a liar," she forced out, each word a new wave of agony, tearing her throat apart. "You are the false shepherd." "Insolent wretch!" Morwenna raised her hand, a bolt of dark energy forming. "I will strike you down!" Just then, from high above, a sound pealed through the temple. Clang, clang, clang. The alarm bell. "Lyra!" Morwenna faltered, her head snapping up. The chanting of her acolytes wavered. What is that? They're supposed to be in meditation. The distraction was just enough. Kalen, seeing Alara's sacrifice, roared. He pulled against his chains, not with mere physical strength, but with the last, desperate remnant of his alpha spirit. "Ilara!" he bellowed, pouring all his will, all his pain, all his hope into her name. The sound hit her. His voice will be the key to her name. It was not a key to lock. It was a key to unlatch. The agony in her throat didn't stop. It changed. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was pressure. Something was breaking. The silver scar below her jaw flashed with blinding light. The magical binding, the collar of silence, shattered. A shockwave of pure silver light erupted from her. It was not the chaotic burst of her childhood. It was the vast, controlled, brilliant power of the moon goddess herself.
The wave of light slammed into Morwenna and her acolytes, throwing them back. The dark chanting stopped. The siphoning ritual was broken. Ilara gasped, her lungs filling for the first time in a decade. The pain was gone, replaced by a surging, incredible power. She tore the veil from her face, her eyes blazing with silver light. Kalen stared at her, his breath catching. "Beautiful," he whispered. Morwenna scrambled to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "No, I will not be undone by a child. I am the High Priestess." "You are nothing," Ilara said. Her voice, her true voice, was not the croak of a moment ago. It was clear, resonant, and layered with the power of the goddess. It rang through the cavern, shaking the very stones. "You have defiled this temple. You have stolen its power. You have lied in the goddess's name." "I did it for control," Morwenna screamed, gathering her dark energy. "The world is chaos. It needs a firm hand." "It needs a true voice," Ilara countered. The silver light coalesced around her. "And yours is false." Morwenna shrieked and lunged, hurling a spear of black energy at Ilara. Kalen roared. The silver light from Ilara's pulse had weakened his bonds. With a final, agonizing surge of strength, he snapped the chains. He threw himself in front of Ilara, taking the brunt of the dark magic on his back. He skidded, hissing in pain, but he held his ground. His wounds were severe, but his eyes were blazing gold. His wolf was free. "You," he snarled, advancing on Morwenna, "will not touch my mate." Mate? The word struck Ilara's heart with the same force her name had. It settled in her soul, a perfect, glowing truth. He was hers, and she was his. Morwenna looked from the furious, unbound Alpha to the glowing, terrifying Oracle. She was trapped. She had lost. "The temple! It's mine!" she shrieked, a last desperate plea. Ilara stepped forward, standing beside Kaelin. The silver light of the goddess poured from her, but it was not an attack. It was a cleansing. "Your connection is broken, Morwenna," Ilara declared, her voice the final judgment. "You are the Forsaken One. You are severed." The silver light washed over the High Priestess. It didn't harm her. It simply disconnected her. The dark, siphoned energy evaporated from her. The power she had stolen from the temple, from Kaelin, from Ilara, bled away, leaving her gasping, diminished. She was just a woman, a cold, old woman, her power gone. She collapsed to the stone floor, weeping in rage and defeat. The other acolytes, seeing their leader broken, fled into the darkness. Silence, deep and profound, settled in the cavern. It was broken by Kaelin's ragged breath. He turned to Ilara, his body scarred and bleeding, but his spirit whole. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice full of awe. He reached out and gently, so gently, touched her throat where the scar had been. It was gone. Not even a mark remained. "Your voice," he whispered. "I knew it would be beautiful." She covered his hand with her own, tears welling in her eyes. Tears of pain, of release, of a joy so profound she had no words for it. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You were the key." "We," he corrected, his thumb stroking her skin. "Together." He swayed, the adrenaline fading, his injuries finally catching up to him. Ilara caught him, her new strength supporting his. "You're hurt." "I'm whole," he countered, leaning his weight on her. "For the first time in months, I am whole." She looped his arm over her shoulder, supporting him as they began the slow walk out of the darkness and into the chaotic, moonlit temple above. They had faced the false shepherd. Now they had to face the flock. The temple was in chaos, just as Lyra's bell ringing had intended. Acolytes and priestesses ran through the halls, demanding answers. When Ilara emerged from the catacombs, supporting the wounded Alpha, a collective gasp silenced the hall. They saw her face, unveiled. They saw the silver light that still clung to her, a soft, divine aura. And then she spoke. "Sisters," she said, her voice clear and strong, filling the grand hall. "You have been deceived." She told them everything. She told them of Morwenna's lies, of the siphoned power, of the prophecy. She held up the ancient scroll, her voice ringing with the authority of the goddess. There was shock, disbelief, but the truth resonated in the very stones of the temple, which already felt cleaner, lighter. And then Lyra stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "It's true," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I saw her. I saw the fear in the High Priestess. Ilara, she is the one. She is the voice." The acolytes, the priestesses, one by one knelt, not in submission to a new master, but in reverence to the truth and to the oracle who had finally been unbound. Ilara looked at them, her heart aching. They were not her servants. They were her sisters. "Stand," she commanded gently. "There will be no more false shepherds. Only the goddess's light, shared by all." Kalin watched from the side, his wounds hastily bound by Lyra. A proud, soft smile touched his lips. This was his mate. Not just a healer, not just an oracle, a leader. Later, after the chaos had settled, after Morwenna had been confined to the same cell Kalin had occupied, Ilara found him on the temple balcony, staring out at the moonlit valley. She had brought him fresh clothes and a potent healing draft. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. "You healed this place," he said quietly, gesturing to the temple. "The air, it's breathing again." "We healed it," she corrected, standing beside him. The night air was cold, but she felt nothing but warmth. "Your roar, it broke the last of the binding." "My pack is still out there," he said, his voice hardening. "Garrus, he's a tyrant. He rules by fear. He told them I abandoned them, that I let my mate die from my own weakness." "What happened?" Ilara asked, her voice soft.
He was silent for a long moment. "We were ambushed," he finally said, his voice thick. "Silver, so much silver. It was Garrus, my own beta. He wanted the pack. He wanted her. My mate, Lyanna. She died protecting me. Garrus, he told the pack I fled, that I let her die." His hands clenched. "He used their grief to poison them against me. He broke me, and then he handed me to Morwenna to be erased." "He didn't erase you," Ilara said, placing her hand on his arm. His muscle was tense, a coiled spring of rage and grief. "He forged you. He sent you to me." Kalin turned, his golden eyes searching her face. "The prophecy. It said we would reclaim the goddess's light. You've reclaimed the temples, but mine, my pack, it's still in shadow." "Then we will bring them the dawn," Ilara said, her voice firm, without a trace of the timid acolyte. He looked at her, surprised by the steel in her tone. "We?" "You are my mate, Kalin," she said, as if it were the simplest, most obvious truth in the world. "I am the voice of this temple, and you are the alpha of the Shadowfen. Your pack is my pack. Your fight is my fight." He stared at her, overwhelmed. This woman, who had been silent and broken just days ago, now stood before him, a beacon of power and resolve, offering him everything. "Ilara," he whispered, cupping her face, his touch reverent. "They will not know what hit them." "No," she agreed, a small smile touching her lips. "They won't." He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers. They stood there for a long time, the moon blessing them. Two broken souls made whole. He was no longer the forsaken wolf, and she was no longer the silent hand. He was the alpha, and she was his voice. She took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Rest," she said. "Heal. For tomorrow, we have a pack to reclaim." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her palm. And then, he murmured against her skin, "We have a lifetime to live." Ilara looked out at the valley, at the dark forest that held his stolen pack.
She wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, she felt the future not as a cage, but as an open sky. She took a deep breath, and her voice, clear and strong, whispered out into the night, a promise to the moon. "We're coming."